Ever since his fourth title defense at UFC 271, Israel Adesanya has been the prize fight everyone's looking for. Not only does the fight mean big money, but it's also a shot at the middleweight title. Kamaru's manager also attempted to push a fight between the two champions, but it didn't go too well. Stay tuned as we give you the latest updates on Adesanya versus Kamaru Usman. The Three Kings. We've seen our fair share of dominant fighters come and go in the UFC. We saw Conor McGregor dictate the UFC in the featherweight category for a good 2 or 3 years, and we certainly can't forget George St. Pierre, the welterweight who had only 2 losses in his entire UFC career. I guess at the end, what we're trying to say is that diversity is what makes the sport so exciting. We get to see fighters from different corners of the world battle it out in the octagon. And while we've seen champions from all over the world, we've never seen 3 champions from the same home ground. We're talking about none other than Francis Ngannou, Kamaru Usman, and Israel Adesanya, the finest African fighters the UFC has ever seen. All 3 champions are catalysts that have sparked mass interest in MMA fighting amongst their fellow Africans. Kamaru Usman became king of the welterweight division when he knocked out Tyron Woodley in March 2019. Adesanya, who's been in the headlines for some time, now emerged as the middleweight champion in the same year when he dominated Robert Whittaker. And finally, in 2021, Francis Ngannou became the heavyweight champion of the world after defeating Stipe Miocic. Together, these champions are known as the Three Kings, the first and only Africans to hold championships in the UFC. There's a brotherly bond between the trio because, let's face it, what they're doing is much bigger than just championship belts. They're getting people to notice the immense MMA talent in Africa. It's gotten to a point where even Dana White has expressed an interest to set up facilities in Africa to scout new talent and bring an entirely different class of fighters to the UFC. Keeping all this in mind, the Three Kings indirectly agree that it's best that they steer clear of one another and avoid fighting. At the end of the day, 3 Africans with belts is much better than an African with 2 belts. The last style bender did not hold back when Kamaru's manager, Ali Abdelaziz, tried to push a fight between him and brother Kamaru Usman. Abdelaziz publicly suggested that Kamaru should move up a weight class and take on Adesanya for the middleweight title. He further went on to state that the fight could only happen if there was enough money involved for both fighters and their teams. During a discussion with MMA Hour, Adesanya said the peanut head has no idea what he's talking about. Adesanya also went on to say that Kamaru's manager is being selfish and there are plenty of other ways to make some money. And to be honest, the last style bender's aggression is totally justified. He has publicly expressed his disinterest in the fight on multiple occasions. The fight will not happen just because it needs to happen. It's a special moment for the fighters and their people. We've got 3 African champions dominating 3 separate weight divisions. The last stylebender thinks it's legendary. 3 African fighters at the top of their game, demolishing all competition and ruling over the sport. People will talk about this time in the years to come. Those guys from Nigeria, they did that. In the end, Adesanya said he understood where his manager was coming from, but he found it really disgusting how he tried to set it up. He further suggested Abdelaziz stop going after dollar signs and acknowledge what the 2 fighters were doing for the sport and their nation. We can't seem to get enough of Adesanya's game both inside and outside the octagon. The guy talks sense and has a vision. He's using his skills in the sport to make a name for Nigeria and African fighters. It's hard not to like the champion. Even harder if you're a fan of Robert Whittaker. Kamaru Usman also gave his manager and other speculators a light shut-up call when asked about a potential matchup with his brother. According to Usman, the fight would need to be worth at least $100 million so that there's enough to go around. Only then would he consider sitting down with Adesanya and setting up a fight. However, if that isn't the case, then he has no interest in fighting a fellow Nigerian for the belt. He also stated that it's better 2 Nigerians hold belts instead of 1 Nigerian holding 2 belts. Next, icebreaker. Heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou is becoming one of the UFC's biggest revolutionaries, fighting against the system to improve how fighters are treated under their contracts. What he's basically trying to do is make enough money to support his lifestyle, keep himself healthy, and put food on the table. And he deserves credit because he doesn't just want all that for himself, but for every fighter in the promotion. However, he did have some pretty bold things to say to UFC chairman Dana White. He also said that UFC contracts have no freedom for the fighter. For example, the contract can say that I might not fight for a year without any explanation, and at the same time, I'm not entitled to a monthly wage or health care, even though the contract states I'm an independent contractor. Francis Ngannou probably created some enemies within the administration when he said that the contract specifically states that the UFC is the judge, jury, and the prosecution. This is probably because a UFC contract promises that a fighter will get 3 fights in 1 year. However, Ngannou has only gotten 2 fights in the last 2 years. He claims that he could have easily fought 5 times in these 2 years. Jake Paul also came to Ngannou's rescue on Twitter, saying that the fighter deserved better than just empty lies from Dana White. He also took serious shots at the UFC president, stating that it's time to stand up and support the men and women that risk their bodies to make Dana White fat and rich. Ngannou further stated that he 100% agrees with what Jake Paul has to say. Well, not the fat and rich part, but what he says about fighters' pay and benefits. This is definitely going to light up the argument between Ngannou and White, especially considering the history between Jake Paul and Dana White. Especially because Ngannou has clearly decided to side with a YouTuber turned boxer. Let's see how things go from here. But to be fair, the UFC should be a little more open to making changes, ensuring the roster's well-being. Israel Adesanya expressed that he would really be sad if Ngannou left the UFC to pursue more lucrative opportunities, which is a bit weird considering Israel has no issue with money because he's currently the second highest paid active fighter in the UFC behind Conor McGregor. Nevertheless, we don't think Ngannou will be sticking around after his contract expires in December. The first thing he's going to do is get a fight with Tyson Fury and make some big money. What do you think? Will Ngannou leave the UFC for better opportunities? Next, better than DC. There's one thing we have to agree with. Khamzat Chimaev knows how to promote himself. We've been hearing his name a whole lot, especially with Israel Adesanya. A lot of MMA experts and fighters have labeled Khamzat as the only fighter who can defeat the last stylebender. Khamzat himself isn't short on confidence either, calling the fight easy money. Daniel Cormier, more commonly known as DC in the UFC world, apparently thinks differently of the matchup. According to DC, Adesanya would smoke Khamzat in a match because of the difference in their fighting styles. On one hand, we have a fighter that has no patience and just wants to maul his opponents into submission. On the other hand, we have a middleweight champion, Adesanya, who likes to take his time and calculate his strikes. DC thinks Khamzat would play right into Izzy's game, giving him chances to land a knockout at every second of the fight. Whenever Khamzat tries to make an advance on the last stylebender, he would be giving an opening as well, and Izzy isn't a fighter that misses opportunities handed to him. The Chechen-born undefeated fighter, however, did not respond too kindly to DC's claims. He responded in his usual style, claiming that he would not only beat Izzy in the octagon, but also get the better of DC. Taking the feud to Twitter, Khamzat tweeted that the last stylebender may be a problem for DC and his team, but for him, he isn't. We just can't get enough of this bloke. He almost reminds us a little of Khabib. He makes big claims, but doesn't seem too cocky. He's undefeated, and he looks mean. Even if he doesn't get the matchup, he might well end up being one of the most entertaining fighters in the years to come. And that's a wrap from our side, folks. Do you think Kamaru and Adesanya are making the right move by not fighting? Will Ngannou ever step into the octagon again? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.